Ray McGovern is going to be here in a second. And my name is David Swanson. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you to Ryan, as always, for allowing us to use Random Row books at no notice with no cost. We can't do without this place. Ryan is sitting right back there. If you all could thank him for letting us use this space. Is Robert Pates here? I want to thank you as well for contributing to the costs of putting this together. Thank you very, very much to Robert. A lot of you may know that on Monday we went to Charlottesville City Council and asked them to pass an amendment urging the state legislature and the Congress to amend the U.S. Constitution to deny corporations personhood, to deny that spending money is protected free speech, and to undo the disastrous Citizens United ruling, which they agreed to and passed 4-0. A bunch of the people who did that are here tonight. Stand up if you were involved in getting that through Charlottesville City Council. Thank you, thank you. I guess Evan's not here. We're starting a chapter of Veterans for Peace in Charlottesville, and you can, I'm a non-veteran associate member of Veterans for Peace, but ask me about it if you want to get involved in that. When I was coming over here a little while ago, I passed the demonstration on the corner, on the far corner of the big intersection here, which is a demonstration against wars that happens every Thursday afternoon. And according to Tony Russell, who's standing up back over here, it's been going since 1991 on every Thursday afternoon, which is quite a record and needs to keep going. And one additional announcement, and then I want to introduce Ray McGovern. A week from this evening at 6:30, a week from not too many minutes from now, at the pavilion at the far end of the downtown mall, there will be a super militarized celebration of Flag Day. And whatever you think of flags, this will be a promotion of wars. Where is Larry? Larry, raise your hand. Larry Bishop is putting together a number of giant signs which will read with a quote from the late great Howard Zinn that says, "There is no flag large enough to cover the shame of killing innocent people for a purpose that is unattainable." If you would like to join us in holding up those signs a week from tonight, talk to Larry. Is Ray ready to go here?
The bathroom.
Ray McGovern, who, among other things, is in the bathroom, worked as a CIA analyst from the administration of John Kennedy to that of George H.W. Bush, around the time this demonstration started over here. Ray's duties included chairing national intelligence estimates and preparing the president's daily brief, which he briefed one-on-one to President Ronald Reagan's senior national security advisors from 81 to 85. In January '03, McGovern helped create Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, VIPS, to expose the way intelligence was being falsified to justify the last big war we relied into on Iraq, not counting Libya. On the afternoon of the day, February 5th, 2003, that Secretary of State Colin Powell misled UN Security Council on Iraq, VIPS sent an urgent memorandum to President George W. Bush in which VIPS gave Powell a C- for content. On March 2nd, Colin Powell, who is now making big bucks with a new glossy best-selling book about his lies that he didn't mean to lie about. On March 2nd, 2006, McGovern returned the Intelligence Commendation Medallion given him at retirement for especially meritorious service, explaining, quote, "I do not want to be associated, however remotely, with an agency engaged in torture," end quote. On May 4th, 2006, in Atlanta, Georgia, McGovern made national news by confronting Secretary of so-called Defense Donald Rumsfeld on live television with pointed questions like, "Why did you lie to get us into a war that was not necessary and that has caused these kinds of casualties?" Ray's opinion pieces have appeared in many leading newspapers in the United States and abroad. He has debated at the Oxford Forum and appeared on The Charlie Rose Show, The NewsHour, CNN, and numerous other TV and radio programs and documentaries. Ray has lectured to a wide variety of audiences. Ray leads the Speaking Truth to Power section of Tell the Word, an expression of the Ecumenical Church of the Savior in inner city Washington, D.C. He also teaches at its Servant Leadership School. Please join me in welcoming Ray McGovern.
After 49 years, Ray still doesn't know how to contend with Northern Virginia traffic when they're doing construction on the Beltway. The last time I was here, I think we were preparing an appropriate welcome for John Yoo. Is that correct, David?
I think you've been here since then, but that was a good one.
That was a good one. I'm really delighted to see so many faces out here, some of which that I recognize from previous battles. Reach a little higher. Yeah, thanks. I can stand up. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Good. Yeah, and before I begin, I just want to add my welcome to David's to everyone here, including those who may be from the organs of public safety. Is there anyone here from the FBI or Homeland Security? Please just raise your hand. Well, they seldom do, but they're often here. But you're equally welcome, wherever you are. Now, I was thinking of trying to start on a little lighter note tonight, partly because this is really dreary stuff, you know. I found myself driving down from the Bay Area of California down to Fresno, about a 3-hour drive. I was going to be on a panel there with Trita Parsi, who knows more about Iran than I'll ever hope to know, and some professor from the university down there. And I was thinking, what might I add? You know, what could I add? Then I thought of this business about all the lies, and I thought of a song that some of you, I see some of you have some gray in your hair, or maybe even if you don't. You remember Porgy and Bess? It ain't necessarily so. Now, with apologies for fundamentalists, this is not making fun of the Bible. This is just the Porgy and Bess Gershwin rendition of, for example, "Oh, Jonah, he lifted a whale." Anybody knows the song? Please sing along with me. Yes, Jonah, he lifted a whale. He made his home in the fish's abdomen. Yes, Jonah, he lifted a whale. But but it ain't necessarily so. No, it ain't necessarily so. They say, oh, Goliath, he lay down and dieth, but that ain't necessarily so. That seems so appropriate for all the claims being made about the weapons and weapons intentions and all about Iran. So I had 3 hours and there wasn't much traffic, so I did a couple of verses that I hope you'll give me just a little time to try out on you, and maybe you can work in here. Here we are. We did Jonah.
Well, didn't they say, oh, Goliath, he lay down and dieth? But that ain't necessarily so. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, to claim he is bad is the fad. He said he would zap Israel right off the map. Mahmoud is a cad of a lad, but it ain't necessarily so. No, it ain't necessarily so. They say he would zap Israel right off the map, but that ain't necessarily so. And I think most of you know that it ain't so. He didn't say that. Okay? Next verse. Israelis, they sound the alarm. The Persians are building the bomb. But they ain't the kooks that do lust after nukes, so sit back and please try to be calm. Cause it ain't necessarily so. No, it ain't necessarily so. They ain't the kooks that do lust after nukes. No, that ain't necessarily so. And the final, with your indulgence. Now, Obama, he tried to seem tough. He huffed and he puffed and don't bluff. In hopes Netanyahu will stop and shout, Yahoo! And turn all his threats into fluff. But it ain't necessarily so, no, it ain't necessarily so. In hopes Netanyahu will stop and shout, Yahoo! And turn all his threats into fluff. Okay. There's going to be some music later, and you know, the warm-up team is always picked to be, you know, to make the real team seem really good. So I'm sure that that's going to work tonight. Where do I begin? It's another song, isn't it? Where do I begin? I guess maybe I'll take a look at what I had prepared here. Yeah, I had thought that since this is the 7th of June, 2012, that we really ought to be careful in marking occasions that need to be marked. And that is that 45 years ago, there was a war raging. Israel was under great threat from Egypt, right? No, that ain't necessarily so. How do we know that? Well, don't believe me. Menachem Begin, the Israeli Prime Minister, admitted in 1982, look, the Egyptian deployments in the Sinai were no threat to us. We have to be honest. We decided to attack the Egyptian, Jordanian, Syrian forces. That was in the New York Times, in the days when the New York Times used to carry straight factual reports. So don't let anyone tell you that Israel was under great stress or great threat at this time 45 years ago. It was not. It was fulfilling a plan that was developed many decades before, and the Germans had a word for it. It was called Lebensraum. Expansion of borders to give more living space to the Israelis, and of course the occupied territories remain, most of them, under the domain of Israel for 45 years, longer than the Soviet Union occupied Eastern Europe. That's a long time, folks. Now, did we condemn this war of aggression? We did. One of the few times we voted with the rest of the world to tell Israel that it had to withdraw to its pre-1967 borders, that it would have to withdraw from the occupied territories. It's been a long time, folks, and they have not. It's just gotten worse. Now, not only that, but I am reminded of tomorrow's anniversary, which is the anniversary of the attack on the United States ship Liberty. How many of you don't know about the USS Liberty attack? Wow, this is unusual. Let me tell you, this is great. I mean, it's unusually great. I know what kind of audience I'm addressing. Let me tell you what happened to me out in Springfield, Missouri, 5 years ago. I was lecturing at a big church hall, about 300 people there, And Mearsheimer and Walt's book had just come out on the Israel lobby, the Likud lobby, more appropriately called. And so luckily it wasn't the book actually, it was their major essay, which had been commissioned by the Atlantic magazine, but when they saw it, they said, oh gosh, I don't know if we can publish this. They couldn't get any American publisher to publish it. They had to get it published in the London Review of Books, and that's why I printed it out for reading on the plane. Luckily, I finished reading it on the plane, and when I was asked in the Q&A what did I think of Mearsheimer and Walt and what they had to say about the power of the Israel lobby, I said, well, I thought it was right on. I thought it was very courageous. I'm not at all surprised that they couldn't even get it published. You know, Walt is a distinguished professor at Chicago, and Mearsheimer is at Chicago, Walt's at Harvard. These are big names, and they couldn't get their article published. I said, the only thing that really surprised me about their book, which is, or at that point, their essay, which was designed to show the power of the Israel lobby, is that it didn't mention the most convincing incident that proves beyond doubt that the Israelis believe that they could get away with murder. And I looked, and there was sort of blank expressions all around. So I said, I'm referring, of course, to the USS Liberty, the attack on the Liberty. And there were a lot of very blank expressions in Springfield, Missouri. And I said, how many of you know about the USS Liberty? 3 people raised their hands. One in the back, one in the middle, one pretty much up front. So I picked the one up front and said, sir, would you tell us how you know about the USS Liberty?
Sir, Bryce Lockwood, Sergeant, U.S. Marine Corps, member of the USS Liberty crew, sir.
I caught my breath, and I said, well, Sergeant Lockwood, would you be willing to come up and share what happened that day with the rest of the folks?
Sir, I've not been able to do that. But it's 40 years now, and I think I'd like to try tonight.
And he came up, and for the next 7 or 8 minutes, gave the most moving first-hand account of what happened on that dreadful day, and how he lucked out by being in the in-between where his men were working with the intercepted messages and the rest of the ship, in the bulwark, I guess to call it. He was going to drop the sensitive cryptological material into the bottom of the Mediterranean, and so when the torpedo hit his men, he was just knocked unconscious, but wasn't destroyed like most of those 25 others. When he came to, he was sent down to retrieve the ones that were left, and there were 2 still alive. He swam one back to the, whatever you call it, I was in the Army, not the Navy, the little hatch that you got up, and it had closed. He banged, he opened it, and he got one guy up, and he was just about to get the other guy up when a wave came and he went out through the torpedo hole into the Mediterranean Sea forever. That was just part of his story. So tomorrow is the 45th anniversary of that attack. And as you know, or most of you know, our government covered that up. The one very, very courageous young Texan from the crew, his name is Terry Harbardier. Since the Israelis shot up their communications radar and the other equipment that they had on desk first thing, there was no way to communicate out, send an SOS. But Terry knew of a loose electrical plug that could be plugged into a non-working message deliverer, and he asked permission to go across the napalm-strewn deck to plug that in and see if he could get that working. And the captain said, "You sure you want to do that?" He said, "Yeah." So he went, and he plugged it in, and he got an SOS off to the 6th Fleet. Okay. Now the 6th Fleet was told, one of your ships is under attack. It's the Liberty. Send help. And so the head of the 6th Fleet, Admiral Geis, dispatched fighter bombers from the USS Saratoga and the USS America. And they were halfway there when he was called on the phone from the White House.
Secretary McNamara here. We understand you have dispatched some planes in the direction of Liberty. You ought to call them back immediately. The guy says, I beg your pardon? Call those planes back immediately.
You know what he says to McNamara? He says, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to talk to your supervisor. And guess what, folks? His supervisor was right there. OBJ gets on the phone and he says, hey, Admiral, you call those planes back. I don't want to cause big problems for our major ally in that part of the world. Now, you get those planes back and get them back pronto. That's what happened, folks. There are all kinds of witnesses to this. Luckily, the Israelis didn't intercept the White House message, and so they thought the planes were still coming. The Israelis did intercept the SOS, and so they got the hell out of there right quick. Otherwise, they would have succeeded in sinking the ship and destroying all of the crew. When the wounded crew were let down in wet lifeboats, the torpedoes from the torpedo ships strafed them and sank the lifeboats. So Terry Halvardier, by the way, was given a Silver Star Award in Central Valley of Central Valley, California, 3 years ago, and I had the privilege of going to see that. He had a congressman that bellied up to the bar, so to speak, and said, look, this action should be recognized. If it weren't for you, Terry, not only 34 of your crew would have been killed and 174 wounded, but the rest of them would have been as well. Now that's really important because people need to know these things, and except for this company, very few people know the power of the Israel lobby and how it really has believes that it can get away with murder. Witness the fact that 34 were murdered. U.S. Navy, U.S. Congress, John McCain's father, who had a role in the investigation that never happened, all of them covered it up. Not only that, but they told the crew that they were enjoined from speaking to anyone about what happened, even their wives. Okay? Now, you want to see PTSD? Wow. I had lunch with the folks that celebrated Terry Halvardier's Silver Star, and they were telling me what it was like not to be able to communicate with one another, not to be able to communicate what happened to their wives under pain of court-martial. So these folks deserve every measure of respect. We always have a celebration, usually in Arlington Cemetery. This year was different. On the anniversary, and I've brought along, and it's still in my car, but it's a little box of explanatory pamphlets as to what happened that day and how we should honor these folks. So that's the 6-Day War. We know that it wasn't begun because of provocations from Egypt, and we know about the USS Liberty. Now, what about the power of the lobby now? And why is it that we're making such a big deal of what we know about the Iranian nuclear program? Our main thrust now, of course, is, all right, Iran, this is your last chance to stop doing what we know you're not doing. I'll say that again. This is your last chance, Iran, to stop doing what we concede you're not doing. Wow. Now, the President himself and the Secretary of State, all of those big dignitaries have referred to the nuclear weapons program of Iran. It's a lie. It ain't necessarily so. As a matter of fact, it's definitely not so. I don't know if many of you witnessed the Face the Nation on the 8th of January, but Panetta, Secretary Leon Panetta, the Defense Secretary, was on there, and he clearly, the way these things work, you get together in the blue room, and Bob Sheeper says, well, Leon, what would you like me to ask you today? And Leon said, ask me if Iran is working on a nuclear weapon, which please. And Sheeper either forgets or he chickened out, okay? So here's Panetta toward the end of the session. He looks at his watch, he says, oh, is Iran working on a nuclear weapon? No. Now, they were generally talking about Iran, but nobody asked him that question. He just wanted to put that down. No, they're not working on a nuclear weapon. Okay. Now, 10 days later, on the 18th of January, Ehud Barak, the Israeli Defense Secretary, was asked in an interview by Israeli Army radio, do you share the American assessment that Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon? Well, yes, they haven't decided yet because, you know, the inspectors are still there. Second question. Well, how soon could they get a nuclear weapon, once they decide to go after one? Ehud Barak, it doesn't really matter. Because to do that, they would have to throw out the UN inspectors, and they would know to start counting. They can't do that without throwing out the UN inspectors. So relax a little, all right? Ehud Barak, the Israeli defense minister. Now, you'll say, well, that's not what I heard about Ehud Barak. And it's not completely disingenuous because he says all manner of things, just like Panetta says all manner of things. Last week, Panetta said we're ready for war with Iran. Ehud Barak is talking about, you know, as soon as they make that decision, we're going to zap them. Well, what's the? I brought a whole folder of statements by top officials that are self-contradictory or internally inconsistent, but I'm glad that I don't have to go through that file. It's kind of morose and sort of boring, and you all know how much smoke has been blown about this problem. We are in negotiations now. Probably it would be good to review the history of the negotiations. You'll remember that candidate Barack Obama thought that it was silly not to talk to people even though they're bad people. He said, you know, if I remember correctly, we talked to the Soviet Union, the evil empire, and actually we achieved some pretty good arms control agreements with them, so I think we should talk to people even though they're evil, okay? Now, that sounds sensible to the most of us, but it took them from January until October to get somebody talking face to face with the Iranians. Now, that's a mark of how much in the way of impedimenta stands in the way of a president doing what he promises to do when it has to do with something that Israel doesn't like. So what happened? Well, they sent the Deputy Secretary of State to Geneva to meet together with the 5+1, the the Security Council people plus Germany, with the top Iranian negotiator. And they were very clever. The West, so to speak, had devised this proposal that they kind of knew Iran could not possibly accept. The proposal was, look, we're really concerned about this low-enriched uranium you have in Iran. Now, most of you will know that to get high-enriched uranium to make a bomb, you have to start with low-enriched uranium, okay? All right. So they said, we're concerned about this low-enriched uranium, and so our proposal is that you ship out 3/4 to 2/3 of that low-enriched uranium out of your control, out to Turkey, Russia, or France, and we will process it from 5% up or 3% up to 20%, which is what you say you need for your medical reactor. Now, these are medical isotopes. Some of you probably, like me, know about CT scans and other kinds of scans. I'm a recovering cancer patient myself. I'd hate to be in a place that didn't have the capability to reassure me that it's not come back, okay? So I had sort of a personal interest in this. Anyhow, they needed uranium enriched to 20%. Now, from 3 or 5% to 20% is most of the way to 90%, believe it or not. That's what the experts tell me. It's not, you know, it's not a arithmetical sort of thing. When you get to 20%, then it's a lot easier to go the rest of the distance. So they wanted to get that 20% back to the nuclear medicine reactor, but out of the Iranians' control. So the top Iranian delegate said, sounds good to me. Yeah, we agree in principle. And after the Westerners got off the floor, they said, really? He said, yeah, I'll go back to Tehran and I'll discuss this with my people. And let's go back. And they decided to go back to Vienna on the 19th of October. So just 2.5 weeks later. So there was some momentum there. Guess what the New York Times said? Wow, if this is real, we're not going to have to worry about Iranian weapons anymore. The New York Times, okay? A lot of us were really buoyed up in these weeks thinking, my goodness, finally there's been a break in this situation. Guess what happened? There's a terrorist group called Jandala. It operates in the fringes of the country of Iran. It's been formed, financed, led by Israeli, US, and sometimes Pakistani intelligence services. And by some strange way, they got access to incredibly accurate information on a meeting of about 25 very senior Iranian Revolutionary Guard generals with their retinue. Okay, it was out in the provinces. And they killed them. They killed 5 of those generals and wounded many others. And they did that on the 18th of October, 2009. Okay, the day before the negotiations were to resume in Vienna. Now, the Revolutionary Guard folks report to the Supreme Leader, Khamenei. He's their patron, and they report directly to him. And I don't know this for sure, but I think it's a fair inference that the head of the Revolutionary Guards went and said, Supreme Leader, you're going to trust these guys? Look what they just did. Look what they just did. And 5 of my generals, including the deputy commander of the ground forces, you can't trust these guys. And that, plus some dissension within the government in Iran with respect to whether we really should give away this much, caused the negotiations to founder. Iran did send somebody to Vienna, but they backtracked on some of the main provisions. So that's what happened to that. Now, am I saying that the Israelis didn't want that agreement? Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Does that mean the Israelis are not afraid of a nuclear weapon in Iran's hands? It means, to me at least, that they know that nowhere near to getting one. And if and when they get one, they will be deterred by the 300 or so nuclear weapons that Israel has. Let me interject here. There is one sense in which we have to take seriously that the Israelis could be concerned about this. And that is this. You know, up until now, if the Israelis wanted to hit out against Gaza or Syria or Lebanon, you name it, you know, they just did. And they didn't worry about looking behind their shoulder. There's nobody really the U.S. is going to say, well, maybe you shouldn't have done that, but they always think, the Israelis, that it's better to, you know, ask for forgiveness rather than permission, so they just do these things, okay? Now, if Iran had just 1 or 2 nuclear weapons, the Israelis would really have to look behind their shoulder. And if the Iranians made so bold as to say, you know, we really don't like you messing up Hezbollah or Hamas, then the Israelis would have to think twice. Think twice. They do it anyway, I'm sure, because of the comparative strength they enjoy. But thinking twice is something they've had to do before. So I think that's the only respect in which the Israelis are genuinely concerned about the Iranians getting a nuclear weapon. So what do the Israelis really want? And we, by extension, since we're sort of walking, as the president described it, in lockstep with the Israelis. You all know what lockstep is? Lockstep is? Do you know where it comes from? Any American historians here? In the late 19th century. 19th century? After the Civil War, whatever century that was, the Penal Code prescribed a procedure where prisoners would have a ball on their left ankle, chain here, and they'd have to grab onto the right shoulder of the person before them, and they would take a high step with their right and drag the ball. It was a ball and chain. That's lockstep, folks. Okay? Now, that was the image that our president used, I think it was on Super Bowl Sunday, to say, we're marching in lockstep with Israel. Now, we also said, before AIPAC, he likes to say I, do you notice? I've got Israel's back. Okay. Now, I don't think it's unfair to put the two images together. If you're marching in lockstep and you've got Israel's back, who's leading? Let's just go back to the negotiations. The ones in late 2009 failed. For the reasons I adduced, I believe that's right. Now they started again the following spring. At our initiative, not really, because Obama was not real happy with what happened and whether he knew about what Hezbollah was going to do or not. It was a good excuse just to kind of say, well, maybe we ought not to negotiate. Maybe these are very bad people after all. But you know what? Two of the upcoming countries in this world, Turkey and Brazil, decided, as they put it, we don't want another Iraq. Okay? We don't want another attack on a country because they are presumed to have nuclear weapons. And so they both went to the White House and they said, we're going to make another try here with Ahmadinejad. We know you think he's an evil guy, but we think we can talk to him. And they got permission, okay? They got encouragement from the President of the United States. They went off to Tehran, negotiated with the Iranians, and reached a deal. It was the same kind of deal as before, except not 3/4 or 2/3, but just half of the low enriched uranium going out of country to be processed into 20%. And some of you may remember the pictures on front of all the papers, where Ahmadinejad, sort of a little guy, De Silva from Brazil, Erdogan from Turkey, and they got their hands together and said, we did it! We did it! We got the agreement, okay? Now what happened next? What happened next was Secretary of State Hillary Clinton got up the next day and said, here is our response to that agreement. Sanctions, strong sanctions. We've got China and the Soviet Union and Russia together on this now, and so we're going to do hard sanctions. Now, what did the Turks and the Brazilians do? I said, who's running this country? You know? Who's running your country? And De Silva had the guts to give the letter that he received from Barack Obama to the Brazilian press, where Barack Obama suggests exactly the kind of accord that De Silva and Erdogan had worked out with Ahmadinejad versus the Iranians. So that's the history of all this. 2009, first one I described, 2010, and now we're finally at the point where we're negotiating again. There seemed to be some progress when the head of the IAEA was really our man. Okay, you remember his predecessor? What was his name? Baradei. Yeah, tough cookie, wasn't he? I remember when I was watching it live on TV when he went before the Security Council before the attack on Iran, and he talked about the documents on yellow cake uranium coming from Africa. I remember him saying, we have looked at these documents now and have an independent group looking at them, and we have determined that they are not authentic. forgeries, not authentic. That's, I guess, diplomatic language. He was tough. They tried very hard to get rid of him, the US did. And now we have our own man in there. His name is Amano. He's a Japanese diplomat. How do we know he's our own man? WikiLeaks. Some of the WikiLeaks cable show that we were putting the arm on all the other voters to vote for Amano. That Amano, in turn, was thanking our diplomats in Vienna for all the good offices that they're performing and saying, you know, I could use a little bit more funding here from my office, and getting it, okay? And so Amano is in no sense an independent head of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. And yet, what was it, 2-3 weeks ago, he went to Iran and came back saying, you know, they're willing to accept the kind of inspection regime that we think is necessary. So we're working something out with them. And just a few days later, the negotiators met, and what were our terms that we offered to Tehran? Anybody know? Shout out, there were 3 of them really. I'll give you a hint. They're the ones that, I was going to say Ariel Sharon, but it's not Ariel Sharon. I wonder if he's still around. Who was the, Bibi Netanyahu, a couple of days before it was revealed what the terms were, said, look, they have to ship out all their low enriched uranium and the 20% now. They have to close down Parcham, which is the major underground processing plant. And they have to agree never to process uranium again. No. And so those turned out to be the terms that we offered Iran. Now, it's a very compelling argument that we give. Iran, you've got to close down that underground facility because it's a provocation. I mean, it's getting near the point where the Israelis can't attack it anymore. So that's really, really a provocation. So you better close it down altogether. Now, the Iranians are never going to do that. So I don't know what's going to happen in the negotiations, but I think what the American people need to know is the full story about these things. A, that Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon, although most Americans believe they are. Most Americans believe, according to the latest poll that's 2 years old now, that Iran already has a nuclear weapon. What was that, 70%? 70. And that's the same percentage that thought that Saddam Hussein was working on a nuclear weapon. So at least we're consistent. So, well, let me just not carry on too much longer here. Let's see what else I wanted to, so I told you about Jun Lola, and you know, in thinking through what's been going on, I think it's really worth noting that we not only seem subservient and overly attentive to what the Israelis consider their strategic needs. Many of our policymakers really have great difficulty distinguishing between what they perceive to be the strategic needs of Israel on one hand and our own strategic needs on the other. But you know, it's even tactically true. But where did we learn this targeted assassination business? Where did we learn to wrap people up without charge or judicial process? I mean, it's sort of like a ditto thing. And these things have incredibly deleterious consequences. Now, let me refer you just to one little incident that you probably remember the beginning of. Remember in 2004, when those 4 contractors, they were Blackwater types, they were going around Fallujah, they took a wrong turn, and they ended up being assaulted, really criminally attacked, and some of them hung up from a bridge. Do you remember that incident? It was very much in all the newspapers. Most people think that that was the first step in this chain of reprisals, but it was the second. 9 days earlier, an old, blind, wheelchaired Sheikh Yassin, the head cleric, Muslim cleric in Gaza, was targeted, assassinated by the Israelis. Now, that was Gaza. We're talking Fallujah, that's in Iraq, right, Brady? Yeah, right. But you know what? On the windows of the cars and trucks that were dragging these 4 Blackwater types to the bridge were signs. The Sheikh Yassin Revenge Corps. In most of the windows in Fallujah, there were signs, "We will avenge you, Sheikh Yassin." Now the rest of the story is even worse. You'll recall that George Bush, we're talking April, May of 2004, he was determined to wreak what most people would call collective punishment on Fallujah for what those, it's a big city, what those folks did. And so he sent the Marines into Fallujah, but it was a haphazard sort of thing, and Marine General Conway complained later that, you know, you can't order us into a city and then wait a week and then order us back. I lost 5 Marines in this, okay? Very unusual for a Marine commander to say that kind of thing. Why did they pull it back? Because the election was coming up, George Bush's re-election, and he didn't want a lot of hostilities out there before the election. What happened the week after the election? They Dresdened Fallujah, not only with the conventional artillery, but with stuff containing this depleted uranium. And some of you probably know that many of the children being born in Fallujah are horribly deformed. And that has a half-life of many, many, many thousands of years. So what I'm saying here is that when you target assassinate somebody, that may seem really great because you did it, right? And you did it with sophisticated technology, and nobody got hurt except this poor slob, right? Okay, and you know, you're oblivious to the consequences. And all I have to say is that since it's been known for 10 days now that our president sits on Tuesdays to review the Tuesday list of candidates. They call them nominations. Nominations for being killed. And he goes through that. He says, number 1, and number 2, he's got children, right? Yeah, let's do 2. Let's talk about 2. We'll do 1 and 3, and then we'll move 4 and 5 up for next week. Give me a break. Give me a break, you know? And I was really taken with the way Scott Shane and Joe Becker, who wrote this article, really informative article in the New York Times, I think it's the 29th of May, how they said, you know, this caused a legal and moral dilemma. How could you align targeted assassinations with American values? Well, hello, that's not a dilemma, that's an impossibility. Targeted assassination without charge, without judicial process, including those of Americans. Al-Awlaki, the fellow from New Mexico, the clerk, the president brags that that was easy. That one was easy. American citizen, that one was easy. So I guess I just have to say that in this Commonwealth of Virginia, where I've felt very much at home for the last 49 years, being a reject from the Bronx, I've come to really be proud of the heritage here. Learned a good bit about James Madison, George Mason. George Mason lived around the block from where I live. I asked about George Mason, you know, I was speaking actually at George Mason University, so I did a little research. I said, now, I know that Madison went to William and Mary, because 4 of my kids went to the UVA, but 1 went to William and Mary, so he's always saying, well, you know, where did Jefferson go, and where did Madison go? They went to William and Mary, right? So I said, I wonder where George Mason went. But you know what? He didn't go anywhere. He was the first homeschooled Virginian. His father died in a swimming accident in the Potomac,
And George Mason spent his youth in his father's library, where all manner of philosophy, theology, political psychology, and all these kinds of books existed. He was a self-taught person. I suppose that this helped him. But when I learned about how the Constitution had been written by these two, Madison and Mason mostly, and how at the very end, Mason said, it's good but not good enough. Sorry, Jim, I'm not going to sign on. Some of you know this probably, but Madison, what? So you wrote most of the damn thing, you got to sign on. He said, no, I'm not signing on because it's incomplete. And Madison said, what do you mean? He said, it's got to have a Bill of Rights. Now, here's the deal. If you assure me that you'll do everything you can to help those of us who are trying to get a Bill of Rights ratified by the rest of the states, then I won't make a big stick out of this, and it'll go through. And Madison said, all right, you have my word. Now in those days, people kept their word, okay? And the Constitution was approved, and Madison, to his great credit, did all he could to get those people riding up and down the eastern seaboard on their horses, getting people to ratify the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. When I look at what's been happening to that Bill of Rights, I'm talking Amendment 1, Amendment 4, and what we've just been discussing, Amendment 5, you know, no one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. Well, hello, how can you have someone who's prosecutor, judge, jury, executioner, police? I mean, that doesn't square. It doesn't align, not only with, it doesn't align with American values and certainly not with legal values. And yet, I haven't heard a lot of dissent or a lot of protest coming from the legal profession. And that's to me a real quandary, because my dad was a professor of law for his whole life, and I'm sure he's rolling over in his grave. And I'm sure that George Mason and James Madison are also rolling over there in their grave to see how our Constitution has been shredded. Now, what do we do about all this? Well, I have a couple ideas. Yeah, it's just one other thing I wanted to mention, and that is that we all know about the National Defense Authorization Act, which was fixed up so that the president is now authorized to call in the Army to arrest any of us. Again, police, prosecutor, judge, jury, and executioner. Or in this case, probably not execution. They just send us to Guantanamo. But not forever, just till there are no more terrorists in the world. You know, when I heard what was going on, and saw the president sneakily signing this thing while we were all having our martinis on New Year's Eve, I said, holy Moses, what have we become? How did it happen? Well, I thought originally that it was Joe Lieberman, John McCain, and Lindsey Graham who kind of thought that they'd shove this down Carl Levin's throat, okay? Well, it wasn't so. Carl Levin revealed, in responding to an objection like this, he said, look, he said, when we sent this bill over to the White House, it didn't include American citizens. When we got it back to the White House, it did. Well, two things wrong with that, folks. Since when does the Senate have to accept wording from the White House? And number two, why did they just accede to it? So, when it happened, I'm thinking, wow, not since after the Civil War, when Posse Comitatus was introduced, a law which prohibited the sheriffs in the South from using the U.S. Army in an internal security function, okay? 140 years ago, I think, okay? Not since then has the Army ever been allowed an internal security function. So why? Why would they do this? And you know what? The best I can figure out, this is all speculation. What I've said up until now is pure fact. What I think is that they're afraid of us.
What I think is that they're afraid that maybe this spring or next spring or maybe this fall, Congress and the White House will be surrounded by 80,000 of us. The Levins and Lindsey Grahams of this world will not be able to go home to their Georgetown penthouses for their martinis. And who are they going to call to wrap us all up? Now, the park police? Not the park police. We have a very good relationship with the park police, okay? I think they're beginning to feel that they're part of the 90%. How about, oh, yeah, there's the Capitol Police. Capitol Police aren't real good at much other than to, you know, make sure you go through those detectors. How about the DC Police? Well, that's surely part of the 99%, and they're beginning to think that. I know, the Secret Service. Likely it's not they're down in Cartagena somewhere, but so. And besides, even if they're all on duty, there aren't enough of the Secret Service. So if you're really afraid that you're going to need somebody to come in there and arrest a lot of us, put us away, round us up, you're going to need somebody really dependable, some young people who take orders reflexively, and corrupt generals, which is what we've got, ordering them to wrap us all up. Now that is my best guess as to why they wanted to be sure they could use the U.S. Army. There's one other thing that's related to what we've said already, and that is that by coincidence, Carl Levin has received more money from AIPAC-related institutions than any other senator or representative in history. And that's partly because his tenure has been so long, but it still speaks volumes. Lindsey Graham, John McCain, Joe Lieberman, what do they all share together? All four of them. They're incredibly pro-Israeli, and they'd very much like to see a strike on Iran. Now, if Netanyahu, and I believe that Netanyahu has the initiative here, if Netanyahu decides that he's going to strike at Iran, and some of our kin, or some of the cliffs on the Strait of Hormuz, and try to, you know, in as best a way as we can with what troops we have left, subdue the Iranians? My goodness, it boggles the mind, I thought. But you know what? That could happen. And I think that these same four are very conscious of that. They realize that the backlash, if you want to see a backlash against Israel, that's going to be what happens if this goes through. They want to be prepared to deal with the backlash and make sure that nothing untoward happens to them. Again, that's speculation, but you know, somebody tell me a better explanation and I'll accept it. Let me just wind up by saying that I think there are things that we need to do and can do. First off, I think we need to spread the word. We need to make sure that our friends, neighbors, and our family know what's going on. I'm reminded of something that Dr. King said in a wonderful letter from the Birmingham City Jail. He talked about injustice and how it needed to be exposed. This is what he said. I think I've got it down. Quote, "Like a boil that can never be healed as long as it's covered up, but must be opened in all its pus-flowing ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light. So too injustice must be revealed with all the political tension its revelation causes to the air of national opinion and the light of human conscience before it can be cured." That's our role, folks. I've already established that you guys know as much as any audience I've ever addressed over the last year or two. And when we know about injustice, I think we need to be willing and able to put our, well, to stick our necks out down. I've been accused of having something against necks. Really. Necks are a nice thing. I like them. They're a convenient connection between head and torso. I'd hate to be without one. But if there's nothing for which you will risk your neck, then it's become your idol. And necks are not worthy of idol worship. And so I think, as Dr. King suggested earlier on, that it is the time to put our bodies into it. We have to be willing to engage in a physical kind of way, nonviolent, I would suggest, but very, very telling in how we address these things. Some of you, no doubt, have been arrested already. Some of you not. The last time I was arrested, when Hillary Clinton didn't like me standing with my back to her, and I was brutalized by those cops. Somebody said to me a couple of days later, "Oh, Ray, you must be used to it by now." And you know what? You never get used to it. I've got something I'd like to share with you from one of my prophet people, Daniel Bergen.
Hey, Ray.
Yeah.
I really, really hate to say anything, but we probably have an hour or two of questions to do in 15 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, let me just wind it up now and just say that I take a lot of encouragement from Daniel Bergen, who has been there, done that, has owned up to the fact that he's never felt comfortable being arrested because he doesn't do good in jail, as he put it. And none of us probably do very well in jail, except for those few times when we're all together and we know we're going to get out. So that's my plea to you, really. Just as Tom Paine identified winter and summer soldiers, we're going to need winter soldiers this summer. And I hope that the rest of you will think about it and think what George Mason and James Madison would have us do in these very critical circumstances, where the Constitution of the United States is being shredded. Last thing I'll say is this. Some of you, no doubt, were in the Army, Air Force, Navy, whatever, and like me, you swore a solemn oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's the way the oath reads, okay? Now, that oath has no expiration date, and I am in a major quandary now as to what that oath requires me to do. And I'm not alone. There are a whole bunch of former Army officers that I'm in touch with who are puzzling through this. We don't know what we're called to do, but we do know that we're not called to sit around and do nothing. So those of you who have had similar oaths, or those of you who feel as strongly as we do about this Constitution, let us see you in action. Let us see you stick your necks out. Easy for me to say, but it's not really so difficult to do. Thanks very much. I'd love to have questions.
PFC line waiver. What about looking at, I've been listening to this and reading about it for years. It seems to me that both Israel, Iran, and the United States have post-traumatic trauma disorder because of our history of imperialism. I heard a lecture at the Miller Center for a Harvard graduate student was saying, we're not an empire, we're going to be an umpire.
Umpire, yeah. Well, I don't know about PTSD, but certainly the empire trappings are a part of this whole thing. When I mentioned at our hearing, John Conyers, that the objective here on the part of Israel and the United States is to make sure that we dominated that part of the world. All the representatives from heavily Jewish districts, just reamed me out with an hour after it was all over. And so did Howard Dean, came back into the office and said, McGovern is anti-Semitic, this kind of thing. But, you have to say it. And the Jewish Voices for Peace, many, many really, really good Jews that I know are plugging away against this thing. And we can't be bashful about all this. We just have to speak out. Next. Yes, please.
Yeah, but you said at one point that even if the Iranians scraped up one or two nuclear weapons, they could be deterred by the Israelis' possession of some hundreds of nuclear weapons. Then you went on to say later that if the Iranians did have a nuclear weapon, it would give the Israelis pause.
Yeah, well, I try to distinguish, you know, a little pause, okay? It would give them a little pause that they don't have to worry about now. Now, I like to quote Jacques Chirac, who spoke very openly about when he was asked at an open venue here, Herald Tribune, New York Times, and Le Monde. They asked him, do you think that if the Iranians got a nuclear weapon, they would fire it fire it at Israel? And Chirac said, oh mon Dieu, he said, if they did, you'd get 200 meters in the air and Tehran would be flattened. He doesn't give me a break, but in French he said that, all right? Now, he had to recant that. It was on tape. 2 days later, he disavowed having said that. What am I saying? I'm saying that the Iranians aren't suicidal. But if they had a nuclear weapon, and it was a marginal thing, like they found out that Israel wanted to attack Hezbollah again or clean out southern Lebanon, then if the Iranians said, well, you know, really ought to think twice about that, the Israelis would have to think twice. Would they go ahead and do it? I think I said before, yeah, I think they go ahead and do it. But nobody likes to worry about something coming in their back door, even if it would require a suicidal person. That's what I meant.
Is this coalition in Israel a hopeful sign or not?
I'm sorry?
The coalition lighting the base?
You know, I don't know. I've been trying to piece that together. It should give him more freedom of action, and yet some of the people in this coalition are more chary of some of these adventurous policies. So I just don't know how it's going to cut. I'm no expert on Israeli politics. Yes, in the middle?
What if you speak about how ground war in Iran would fare as far as the United States, if we were to engage Iran in a ground war? I mean, we haven't really, with Iraq, we had sanctions against them for over a decade. Yeah. We were pounding them left and right every Clinton. And we don't have that with Iran, so.
Well, ground wars are passé. We don't do ground wars now. We have these planes which do the wars first. Okay? Some of them don't even have pilots, so nobody gets killed. It's a great, great, great thing, except it never wins a war. I remember in Vietnam, LBJ came to us, CIA, and said, hey, these blue-suited generals, they're telling me that they got this new airplane called a B-52, and it's got these great big bombs. They want to seal off the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and Ho Chi Minh won't give up. What do you guys think? And we could hardly suppress a laugh, but we waited a decent interval, 2 days, and came back and said, now, Mr. President, number one, the Ho Chi Minh Trail doesn't look anything like I-66 or I-95, you know. It's something quite different. And number two, Ho Chi Minh's not going to give up. We know Ho Chi Minh. We brought him into Hanoi when the Japanese had to leave, okay? He's not going to give up. Nobody gives up on the bombing, okay? And so if you're not going to put ground troops in because you don't have any, how are you going to conquer or subdue a nation of 80 million people as powerful and as talented as Iran? They don't want to subjugate them. They just want to do a lot of damage so that they'll set back what they perceive to be their nuclear program, and that's, that would be a big win for them. Yes, please.
Kind of two questions. The first part of it is, do you see a U.S. hand behind the Arab Spring? And
do I see what?
The U.S. hand behind the Arab Spring? And also, what effect would an attack on Iran have in Syria and the other countries?
Well, last first, I think Syria is the focus of a lot of attention now, because if we could do a Libya operation against Syria, then Iran would be deprived of one of its major friends, okay? First part of your thing, no, I don't think the West had anything to do with the popular uprising in Paris this spring in Egypt. Matter of fact, as you recall, Hillary Clinton and the president postponed wishy-washy. Oh no, we want stability, and well, looks like, well, no, we want, So they were against it. It took them by surprise. I'm sure it took everybody by surprise. But no, they're not. And that's the thing I forgot to mention. I mentioned it briefly. Israel has had a very bad hair year, okay? Egypt, 80 million people. Last year, subservient, calmed down, restricted. Now, not only free, but you've got Muslims dominating the parliament. You've got the gas cut off, the natural gas, and you've got people saying we're going to fling open the doors to Gaza. Real stuff. We've got people in Egypt saying we care about the Palestinians. Knock it off. 80 million people. How many Israelis? What, 7 million? Something like that? North Turkey is really still very ticked off about, for some reason they don't like to have the citizens massacred by the commandos in the Israeli Navy. And so they lost Turkey. And Iran, well, Iran used to be a very close ally of Israel. Did you know that? Before the Shah fell, they used to have very close relations. So they don't do that. So if you look at in the UN, Israel is isolated in a way it's never been isolated before, in my view, and that could be bad as well as good, because you know what Netanyahu needs to prove now, I'm trying to get into his mind, is that yeah, he's isolated, but he's still got the best friend anybody could possibly have, and that's the United States of America. And how does he demonstrate that? By starting a little hostility with Iran and having us jump in with both feet. And when I say both feet, I mean with our wonderful Air Force and drones and all that kind of stuff, not with ground troops to the degree we can prevent it. Yes, somebody back there.
Yeah, I hate to look backwards instead of forwards, but I was wondering if you were aware, or I'd like to make you aware of the work of Dr. Chris Busby, who went to Fallujah to study the depleted uranium contamination in the soil and in the people, and what he found was enriched in uranium. And
this is in Iran?
This is in Iraq, in Fallujah.
In Iraq.
In Fallujah. And, you know, I don't know where else besides weapons that enriched uranium would come from in Fallujah.
Yeah.
So I think we have some kind of nuclear weapons that are in use by our military currently.
In Iraq?
In Iraq.
Fallujah, he said.
In Fallujah?
In Fallujah. The scientist's name from England is Dr. Christopher Busby.
Okay, I'll look it up. Thanks. Anybody else? We got about 3 more minutes, is that right?
Yeah. That is correct.
Okay, yes, please.
If nobody else has a question. Spent a long time in the intelligence community, but you seem to have great faith in the fact that Nevada doesn't think the Iranians are having a nuclear weapons program is only based on the intelligence.
Yeah. Well, that's the good news, okay? But what I normally start off with sometimes is pointing out that there are 2 CIAs, okay? There's the one that Harry Truman set up to give him honest intelligence on what was going on in the world. An institution not under the Pentagon, who always saw the Russians as 12 feet tall, or under the State Department, which was always defending its policy. An independent place where he could go and say, Mr. Director, come down here this afternoon at 2 o'clock. I want to know what you and those 2 universities worth of specialists you have out there in the woods of Virginia, what you really think about this subject. I know what Pentagon's saying, I know what the state, I want to know what you think, and be able to expect a straight answer. Now, if you were president, wouldn't you like to have that capability? Yeah. Now, guess what? After I had just about given up, and was able to throw, willing to throw the baby out with the bathwater, I won't talk about the other CIA, you know what that's been doing, okay? That was an accident of history, and the bad mistake was to put them together. Now, the place that Truman intended, where I worked for 27 years plus, after the debacle, where George W. Bush had, well, the word really is prostituted the intelligence. Don't let anybody tell you that was mistaken intelligence. It was fraudulent intelligence. The head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, when he released a 5-year study report, a bipartisan report, said the intelligence used to justify the war in Iraq was uncorroborated, contradicted, or even non-existent, end quote. His words. What does non-existent intelligence look like, folks? Forgeries and stuff? Okay. So, what I'm getting at is that president corrupted not only the guys that are willing to go out and do torture, but he corrupted my colleagues in the analytical branch, okay? Guess what happened? Somebody came in as head of the National Intelligence Directorate and hired an honest guy from the State Department to come in. His name is Tom Finger. He brought some State Department analysts with him, and the first thing he said is, hey, these estimates on Iran are really far from hunger. You've been saying ever since 1992 that they're just 5 years away from a nuclear weapon. 97, 5 years away. 2001, 5 years. Isn't it getting embarrassing? We're going to do a bottom-up assessment, and we're going to do it right. It took all year. All year. And in November 2007, 3 weeks after George Bush publicly said, Iran is just about to get a nuclear weapon, and what do you want, World War III? His words. Tom Finger issued this estimate which said, and I quote, Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and has not resumed work on a nuclear weapon. Now, that estimate and the fact that the generals and admirals that didn't want to be on the receiving end of an order from Cheney or the president or anybody else to start a war with Iran, and argued successfully that the president needed to release that, to sanitize it and get that judgment out of there, that stopped the war. That stopped the war that was being prepared by Bush and Cheney for 2008, last year in office. You can hear what Cheney says about that on the Sunday talk shows, and read, if you can stomach it, George Bush's book. Because what he says is, that estimate deprived me of the military option. I don't know why they said those things. Could be because it was right. Because I couldn't understand that. But, and this is a great paragraph, quote, how can I justify authorizing a military strike on a country with nuclear development facilities, but according to the intelligence community, no active nuclear weapons program? End quote. Well, bummer. Bummer. And what he did was go off to Israel 2 months later and apologize for the estimate and said he didn't agree with the 16 unanimous agencies. And so you can see the dynamic at work here. And what I'm saying is, in answer to the question that I forget what it was now, but the intelligence, you were asking about whether
you can have a high degree of certainty in the intelligence, knowing what you know, having spent many years and seeing things come and go.
Well, in this case, they were right. And it all really, like anything else, it depends on integrity. Integrity counts. And I know these folks that were brought in. Tom Finger's at Stanford now. They bellied up to the bar, I guess they kept the conclusions from the president until the very end, and then just let it out together with the senior military who wanted that to get out so they could prevent a war. It's a really nice story, and it's nice to be able to be proud of my part of the agency.
Well, I think we got to...
Okay, but I have to do it now. I'm sorry I was late. I'm really sorry, but I really have enjoyed being with you all. Thanks very much.